Today, I'm going to show you guys how I replace disc brakes and some tips and tricks on how to make them last longer. So, this is my girlfriend's 2014 Toyota Rav4, and her rear disc brakes are about wore out. So this job is going to start off by taking off the wheel. Alright, with the wheel off, we get to see our brakes. So we've got our rotor and we got our caliper. And we got the caliper bracket. These little tin shims is what the brake pad rides on. And the brake pad gets squeezed to the rotor by the caliper piston. These being rear disc brakes, they also have an internal drum brake for the emergency brake. And that's fed by this cable right here into the back. This is 90% of the cars will have this configuration. You have the rotor that's just kind of floating on the hub, caliper with two bolts that hold the caliper to the bracket in which the caliper can slide on, and then the caliper bracket bolted to the steering knuckle with two more bolts. With the caliper bolts removed, we can remove the caliper. I don't like to let these things just dangle like this. I always like to support them somehow. This car has these control arms right here that shouldn't put any strain on this brake hose. So we'll just leave it here. One thing that you should take note of is if there's any kind of clips or anything on the brake pad itself. So you can see this little piece of sheet metal down here. This is a brake pad squealer. So basically what this is designed to do is to rub against the rotor face, letting the driver know that, hey, your brakes are getting really low. You want to put these back in the same orientation. So this car, both the inner and outer pads have that squealer on the bottom. So when we reinstall our new ones, we want to put them back to that factory location. Now onto the rotor. These rotors can be seized to the hub. You might need to take a hammer and strike it between the lug studs here just to free it from the hub surface. Now some cars will come with these little threaded holes, and you can use those to kind of pull the rotor off the hub surface. So with the rotor removed, now you can see the brake shoes for the emergency brake. This is the kind of style of drum brakes. Usually you just got some springs with some pins that they kind of pull the shoes against, and then they're nailed in the back right here with these clips, just kind of hold the shoes against the backing plate. Then you'll have a lever on the bottom that the cable actuates. Usually what I do is when I have the rotors off, I'll actually clean the dust off of this and blow it off, make sure everything's working correctly. Everything inside here looks pretty good. I'll hit it with a little bit of brake clean, and then we can start reassembling. One of my tips for you guys to actually get your brakes to last longer is to make sure that you're replacing components that are worn. So if your caliper brackets have seized pins on them to where the caliper can't float on that bracket, you should just replace them. You know, you're there, it's a little bit expensive, but it's going to save you money in the long run. So those pins have to move freely. And also associated with those pins is those rubber seals. They shouldn't be dry rotted. You shouldn't see any cracks in them because those little boots hold that grease in there. And make sure that that grease is on the surfaces that it needs to be on. Another thing is I like to apply disc brake quiet to my pads. You just apply it to the backing plate of the brake pad. You should see a little tin shim on the back. I just apply it to that, kind of a thin coat, and that way your brakes won't make any kind of squealing noises. And also, I always replace the rotors, no matter what. I mean, if they're $100 a piece, to me it's cheap insurance. If I'm getting new brake pads, I might as well get new rotors at the same time. When buying brake pads, I always buy the ones with the stainless steel shims for where the brake pads ride on the caliper mount. I've had to kind of wire wheel and clean up shims before. It's never good. Those brake pads have to slide on those shims. So anything that inhibits it from doing that is going to wear your pads out quicker. I'll do a lot of test fitting of the brake pads in the caliper mount before I actually install them on the car, because if those don't slide properly, then they're just going to wear out sooner than they should. One thing I also like to do is use a brake parts lube on those shims to keep the pads moving after I've had the pads on there for 6 months. You know, lube in the right spots can save brakes, in my opinion. In summary, the parts that move should be free of wear, free of cracks. Always buy brake pads with the stainless steel shims and use disc brake quiet. So I always like to use Raybestos. They seem to have a pretty good name in the game, and I've always been really happy with the quality of their pads and stuff. You seem to kind of get what you pay for with them. And then I'll just buy some fairly decent rotors. When I'm buying rotors at the parts store, I'll ask them for the cheapest, and I'll ask them for the most expensive, and what you got right in the middle. And the one right in the middle is usually the one I buy. I don't mess around with warranties and stuff, because brake warranties, in my opinion, are just a waste of time. So here's our brake caliper mount. We got our 2 pins. The seals on them look to be in pretty good shape. No splits or cracks or leaking grease or anything. They both seem to move, so that's good. So first things first, we got to replace these shims. Now we can try our brake pads, just like this. And all you're really looking for is that they move by hand. You shouldn't have to put a screwdriver in here or anything. It should just move. And at the same time, you don't want them too loose because they can actually chatter inside this caliper mount. This one seems to be pretty good. So once we know that, I like to take our disc brake quiet, and I'm just going to apply this stuff to this metal shim here. What you don't want is this stuff to get actually on the friction of the brake pad, because it'll cause this brake pad to seize to the rotor. You definitely don't want that. Now you have to wait 10 minutes for this stuff to set up. Alright, back to our caliper mount. We need to lube up our 2 pins here. Now I need to lube up the points where the pad touches this caliper mount on the shims. So I'll put a little lube at this very end down here, kind of far away from where the rotor is going to be, because you definitely don't want this stuff on your brake rotor. I'll just kind of work this stuff in once I got it on there. Alright, most rotors are shipped with an oily substance on the surfaces just to keep it from rusting. So you'll want to brake clean the hell out of this too. And the most important step to any brake job, you always want to push the brake pedal until it gets hard. What this does is ensure that the piston is against the brake pad. Because what you don't want to do is get in the car, push the brake, put it in drive, and then end up with no brakes at all. So that's it, guys. That's replacing disc brakes. I hope you guys found this video interesting, and we'll catch you on the next one.